Oh, the conference presentation, so important to intellectual life, so bad, so boring. I've been to tons of conferences, and I could probably just count on the fingers of one hand. I could get into a horrible carpentry accident and count on the fingers of one hand the number of good talks that I've seen at a conference. That sounds really rude. I don't know why I'm so hostile towards conference talks, but it raises a question, why is this? Why aren't conference talks better? Now, I'm most familiar with academic conferences, but the genre's flawed even when you move into more professional conferences. Now, why is this? I think there's a bunch of reasons. I would say one is because they can be bad. There are very few people really pushing to improve conference talks, but you can do better. And with just a little effort, you can stand out at a conference. And so what we're going to do in this video is talk about some general concerns with conference talks and then explore a few models for arrangement. So how can we get better at this? Well, to begin with, don't automatically arrange the talk like your paper. I would say one of the dominant reasons conference talks are not great is because the talk simply replicates the paper. So if you're at a conference, odds are you're presenting on a paper that you wrote or an article that you're working on. But speaking and writing are different media. In this specialization, we've talked about the massive differences between the visual nature of an essay and the auditory nature of speaking. And this is especially true with research articles, right? So in your article, in your paper, the reader can mull over your data table, right? They can spend a couple of minutes on that. But in a talk, that data goes by in seconds. And so you just can't have the same level of discussion. So think about citation practices, right? So quotations, parentheses, whatever. The modern research article is first and foremost a visual document. And just performing that visual thing is going to be a bad presentation. So an article and conference presentation are both reporting on your research, but they're separate. And I think it's helpful to sort of design an outline based on your research, but not necessarily writing it up just as you would the article itself. So the organization's not exactly the same as it would be in the article. So what's some of these big differences? Well, I think balance is one of the big ones. You should, in your presentation, focus most of your time on your findings. So there are genre constraints to a research article that don't translate to a 10 to 15 minute talk. And I would say the most common issue is spending too long in the works cited in the relevant literature, right? That's an essential part of the paper. You gotta get your research into the right conversation, but that can eat away at your presentation time, right? You wanna get to the findings, the analysis, whatever. So here, go ahead and take a look at this. When working with people on research talks, this is the breakout that I start with. Now, certainly your topic and audience will affect this, but in general, I want to start with my time devoted to the meat of the research. You know, what do I bring as a researcher? Not, you know, what did I read about or how can I talk about the existing literature? Now, if I want to show my unique contribution, I still need to provide some context. So if you're at a conference, even in your subspecialty, there's a pretty strong chance that not everyone in your audience shares your exact same knowledge base. And I think the tendency is to go very hyper-specific, and I think that's often the wrong choice. While the time spent on general background might not be very long, I do think you should start with a more general overview to allow all members of the audience easy access to your content. Finally, and I wish this would go without saying, but please don't just read your paper at the conference, right? You can distribute copies of the paper if you want, but that oral mode should be respected. And I mean, you can think about your own experience here. Have you ever been to a conference and sat through somebody just reading their article and gone like, oh, whoa, that was beautiful, that was magnificent? Probably not. Or if you did, you saw like the unicorn of conference talks, because that is a unbelievably rare event to have someone read and have it sound really good. So if those are maybe some of the general concerns, what are some possible models? Well, we can start most generally with kind of a model that more or less follows the basic research paper layout. So you might start off with a general orientation. Then, you dive into your specific study and then devote your time to the finding, or in this case, the discussion and implications. These are coming from the paper, but they need to be trimmed for oral presentation. Now, Most of my conference talks look more like this. So I start off with a brief opening, sort of justifying the area of study, a bit of a discussion of the study design and method, but then I spend the vast majority of my time in the analytical points, right? So what did I find and how can I show that? Certainly most dissertation proposals sound kind of like this, right? There's a gap in the literature because we don't have sustained interest in the field. Here are the details of my proposed project, and once I conduct my research, here's what I'm hoping it will contribute to the larger discussion. So your arrangement may vary, but the key thing to remember is that this is a talk, not a paper. And I know that can be a challenge. Years ago, I was working with a group of climate scientists, and many of them were still pretty young, so they're at the beginning of their careers. And so I'm up there and I do my normal shtick about doing clear research talks, and I had this guy, and he quite honestly said he didn't want to be clear when he gave a research talk. And why? Because he was worried that if he was clear in his discussion of his research, then people would ask him questions. And I understand that. It makes me sad, but I understand why someone at the beginning of their career is just kind of hoping to sort of hide in the shadows. But it's not a good presentation strategy. And I would say most senior researchers in almost any field would say the opposite. They want clear presentations. Why? Because they want results they can use. They want to just drive that discussion forward. So, your conference talk is an opportunity to participate in an actual discussion on your research. But you need to be understood in order to actually do that.